Now we'll touch base where the scientists are in the dimension kind of view of the universe, as it were. And they have some problems. A little bit, they got some problems going on there. The general theory of relativity came up with by Einstein back in the early 1900s. Kind of takes Newtonian physics to another place. And it works. Because of his equations, scientists were able to predict black holes. They were able to predict light bending around suns, for example, which isn't possible in Newtonian physics. But it is explained by the equations in the general theory of relativity. Quantum theory is more to do with the subatomic particles, and it works as well. It explains atoms and the interaction with atoms. It explains radio waves and light being both a particle and a wave. And this has all been proven to be very beneficial, very useful. The problem with quantum theory is that it predisposes gravity doesn't exist. If you have gravity in the equations, it doesn't work. So you got to ignore gravity. It's a problem. It's a problem. But it works. It helps, so it works. But because you ignore gravity, the general theory of relativity virtually explains gravity. But the math doesn't work at all. There's a conflict, a very severe conflict between these two theories. And Einstein spent the last 30 years of his life trying to kind of come up with a theory that embraced them both. But he didn't do it, couldn't make it. Now the new theory that they have is a string theory. And that's an interesting theory. The string theory is a very interesting theory. And it's very elegant. It's early days yet. I mean, although it started, I think, in the late 80s, somewhere in the 80s, I believe it was first invented. And they're still working on it. The most recent part of it is the M theory. That's the most advanced portion of the string theory, at least last I checked. And it can understand both quantum and the macrocosm and the microcosm. And the way it does it is beautifully elegant, really. They postulate that all matter and all energy is based on one string, one type of string. So one-dimensional string, which is hard to understand, one-dimensional string, but it's a one-dimensional string. And depending on how this one building block in the entire universe works, or how it manifests, is how it vibrates. Depending on how it vibrates, it can be a light particle, it can be gravitational energy, it can be a proton, it can be an electron, a quark, it can be any of these things that we know about in the universe. Presumably dark energy, presumably dark matter, depending on how it vibrates. Now, another interesting side effect of the crazily complicated math is that they have to postulate 10 or 11 dimensions. It's the only way that the math works. Now, that's obviously a problem because they don't know what these dimensions are, but the math says that it has to be there. Now, they also say that because it's the early days and they haven't really completely cracked the whole code yet, these numbers of dimensions may change. They don't know. So it's interesting. We'll get back to the string theory a little bit later in the talk. It's a nice theory. I like the theory. It's a good theory. But it works for my lecture too. So it helps. Now we get to we're starting to get to the main theory now, and this is the 7 dimensions of creation. Where did they come from? Where did this theory come from? It's not my theory. Where did it come from? And it came from beings from outside of our world. And it was given through a yoga master, the founder of the Aetherius Society, Dr. George King. And he was born in 1919, died in 1997. The important aspect is that he was a master of yoga. And this is important because information of this importance has to be right. If anyone has tried to communicate with their guides or tried to communicate with the other realms, and you try and get some information, it's extremely difficult to separate your thoughts with the thoughts of your guide or whoever you're trying to communicate with. Very, very difficult. And even some of the best mediums only get, say, 15, 20, 30% right. Most of it's them. So the advantage of communicating through a yoga master is that a yoga master has trained his mind. And Dr. King spent 10 hours a day for 10 years doing very intense, very evolved yoga practices. And you get to a point where you can look at a keyhole for like 6, 7 hours and have no other thoughts at all go through your mind. Completely transfixed on the fascinating life of a keyhole. I'd have a hard time doing it. But if you can do that, then you can focus on the information. He actually focused on a light beam. Focus on the information and get it 100% accurate. And if you're giving across new information for a world that desperately needs some new information, you want to get it right. So that's one of the reasons why they chose Dr. King. Now, he wasn't the only one that they chose, but he was known in his day as the primary terrestrial mental channel. He was the primary channel for the information at that time. Now, I spoke about advanced beings sending this information to us. And it's interesting to note that most of this information comes from planets in this solar system. Now, that's kind of a controversial concept, because I don't know about you, but when I've looked at the photographs of the complete mapping of Mars, there's not a lot of happening there. Not a lot of civilization going on the planet Mars. Now, some would say, like Mike Barrow would say, that there's a lot that's been there before, but there's not a lot going on right now on Mars. But just like we have astral planes on Earth, you got to figure they got astral planes there too. And they, being more evolved, both spiritually and technologically, they choose to live on the higher vibrational realms. And so unless you are on a higher vibrational realm, like if you're on level 5 on this planet, you would be able to see them. But if you're on the physical plane like we are, you can't see them. Just like you can't see the other realms on this planet, unless you die and go back, everything. So the next question is, people will ask is, if you were an advanced spiritual being living next door on Mars, and you had all this technology at your disposal, all this knowledge at your disposal, and the people next door are just killing themselves. You got tsunamis, you've got earthquakes, you've got mass starvation, they're killing each other with bombs and machine guns, they're just really hurting themselves. You'd want to help them. And so the natural question is, if there are spiritual beings on Mars and Venus, where are they? Why are they just ignoring us? How can they be so cold? And the thing is that because of the law of karma, they aren't allowed to help us. And karma is action and reaction, opposite and equal. It's a lesson.